Okay, starting off with the materials, I had some craft syringes, some E6000, and some Jolene crystals that I got off Amazon. I got them in the sizes SS20, SS16, and then their nail crystal sizes, which were like SS12 and below. And then so I just emptied the Jolene crystals into a lid I had laying around, and they're pretty easy to use because they come in like a bigger baggie that has like a Ziploc thing at the top, which makes them a lot easier to store because I don't really have a container for rhinestones, so this made it a lot easier. And then I just emptied them into a little lid, and then I'm using a chopstick with some melted candle wax at the end to pick up rhinestones when they're facing upwards, with the shiny side upwards. And so it's just nice to practice just dabbing real quick to pick them up. And so to set up the syringe, you're going to take a syringe that's maybe anywhere from 3 milliliters to 10 milliliters out, and you also want to get one of the thicker sizes of needle out because E6000 is pretty thick. You want it to be able to flow freely. And then you fill up your syringe by kind of manhandling the E6000. It took me a really long time to fill up my syringe, so that's why we're speeding through it. But you want to leave a little bit of space just so when you put the plunger back in, you don't end up pushing a bunch of it out. Then just screw on the top, push in the plunger, and then wait for all the air bubbles to rise to the top. Now, it's pretty important to practice your method of dabbing E6000 onto your material, and so I like to practice on a little paper towel. You want to just press down, flick up really quickly, just to get a little dab. There's kind of a method to it, and so you want to practice before you start, otherwise you'll make a big mess, and it'll be difficult to clean up because it's E6000. So I recommend practicing first. And then once you think you got it under control, go ahead, and I'd recommend starting off slow on whatever it is you're rhinestoning. And so I'd do maybe 1 to 4 dabs of whatever it is before going ahead and putting your rhinestones on, because you're going to be slower once you start. And as you go on, you'll get into the rhythm of it. So just pick up the rhinestone with your chopstick when it's facing up, and then place it right onto the glue where you've placed. And then you can go ahead and adjust it with your fingers afterwards. I feel like it's easier than trying to adjust it with the chopstick because the chopstick does have a little sticky end, and so it kind of pulls instead of pushing it where you want it to go. And then go ahead and repeat this process. It's important that your dabs are individual of one another and not just one big line, because then if the E6000 it gives a whole big line, and then you lose a bunch of rhinestones instead of one individual rhinestone. Think Christmas lights with this one. You want one to go out and not the rest to go with it. So, be sure to space it out and really get a feel for the distance that you need to get it. If you're doing this on a stretchy material, then you also need to keep it spaced out, because if you have too much glue put close together, then the material won't stretch like it's supposed to. So if you're stoning a dance costume, it's important to keep that in mind, that there does need to be a little bit of space. And so I'm just going around and stoning the tops of the cups here. Depending on what kind of bodice or bustier that you are stoning, you're going to make different decisions based on how it's built. Mine isn't built exactly like Satine's is, so I'm making adjustments just to make it fit more with the bodice that I have, but also still fit in the spirit of Satine. So here's how it looks really quickly, in case you're wondering just how the Jolene crystals look without any speeding up. And so I'm going back, and now I'm going all the way around the cup. I'm doing more dabs than I was doing at the beginning because I've gotten used to the speed and it's easier to kind of space it out. And then I'm just going down the side and I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to keep everything evenly spaced, trying to keep everything individual of one another. And it's fine to keep going back and making adjustments just to get everything in the lines that you want them to be. And unfortunately, this part of the video is the first of many instances in which my big fat head decides to get in the way of the video, and it makes it harder to see what I'm doing. So hopefully you can see what I'm doing and the narration is helping, but I'm just going through and I'm lining all the lines of the cups. And then I did that to the other side. I added some more rhinestones, and now I'm just going to go down the boning and do the same thing. Again, I know Satine's costume doesn't have a straight down boning, but I've looked at other people who have done Satine costumes, and what I've noticed is that the really crucial features of a Satine costume is to have the hat with a sparkly brim, the gloves, and then the sparkly outfit. So I feel like as long as you have those 3 things, you're gonna be okay. But if you want to go for accuracy, then I'd recommend getting something more similar to what Satine is wearing. But I think it's pretty easy to come close, as long as you're hitting those 3 notes. At this point, my syringe ran out, and it says it is a non-refillable syringe, but I did not believe that, so I pulled the plunger right out. And I just refilled it as I would, okay, now I picked up the E6000, and I went ahead and refilled it just as I did the first time. I really had to manhandle the E6000 this time because it was really running out, so I speeded through that a lot. This was the first of many refills that I did in making this costume. So in case you're wondering, yes, as long as it's a fresh needle that you've been working with like all day, I'd recommend just refilling it. It works pretty well. If it's from the day previous, just get a new one. And there are 2 parts of the plunger. There's like a little squishy part, and there's like the stick part that you push on. If those 2 get separated, then you're gonna have to fish the squishy part out if you want it to work. But I found that because it's glue, the 2 end up getting stuck back together, so you're good. And now I'm working in the dark here because I have a pet bird and he does not like it when the lights are on past a certain hour. So lucky for us, that lets us see how the Jolin crystals shine with lighting on them, and I think they shine pretty well. So I'm doing this part in regular time just so you see how they shine naturally on their own instead of all sped up. To be honest, this was a lot better than I was expecting from Amazon crystals, so I'm pretty pleased. And I'm just continuing going down the bodice and covering the boning in crystals. And like I said, it's a much faster process once you kind of get the hang of it. And once you're doing things like straight lines, there's really not that much adjusting that needs to be done. Later in the bodice with our design, there is a lot more shifting and eyeballing things just to make sure the right distance. And that's a bit harder, and so I'd also say it's a bit more time consuming. So if you are trying to make something very quickly, I'd recommend just sticking to basic things like this, where you're following an already set pattern instead of making one off the top of your head. And then now I'm just going to go ahead and do the straps. I'm not doing the stretchy part of the strap just because, like I said, there's a lot more spacing issues that comes with stoning a stretchy material. And I already feel like my hair is going to cover that part anyway, so I don't really see a point. And so I'm just following the edges that were the hem, and I'm covering that with crystals because I think that looks cool. And something else I discovered is that if you shake your crystals, that they'll end up all right sides facing up, because since they're flat backs, the flat bit will just slide. Meanwhile, the cut piece, the shinier side, isn't all even. They'll end up flopping over eventually, so gently shake if you want to flop them back over. Try not to crash any of the stones into the walls of your container, because then you'll just end up flipping them all back over and undoing your work. So when I say shake gently, the keyword is gently. And so at this point, I'm switching from my SS20s to my SS16s, and I'm gonna try to fill in the bodice with my stones. And now I'm doing this in a way where I'm kind of offsetting the stones. And so I'm doing 1 stone, and then around it, I'm doing 2 stones. And so in essence, the next line of stones aren't gonna be completely in line with the previous set of stones, but they're gonna be offset a little bit to make almost like a little diamond pattern. And now this is the part where I think it's really tricky, because you do have to keep it consistent. And there's a lot of eyeballing you need to do, a lot of checking to make sure everything's even, a lot of checking to make sure you have the perfect little triangles going on. My head just loves getting in the way here, but I hope it's pretty clear what you're seeing. I think this is a really good way to cover space, because since crystals are so small, it's really not that easy to cover an entire space with crystals. And so having a cute little spacing pattern like this allows for an area to still be covered without completely burning you out of both your time and your wallet. And even though this was actually probably the most time-consuming part of rhinestoning this bodice. And then at this point, I shake my crystals out of my container. The horror. The smaller parts, I will say, were easier though, because then it's just 2 rhinestones offset and then 2 rhinestones. I think this part kind of makes it easier to see what I was going for the entire time. And I went ahead and did this on the other side and the cups, with leaving some space in the middle just to create a little pattern, just to be a little saucy, and also to do less work, to be honest. And so now I'm going ahead and I'm stoning the upper part of the cup, since my bodice was split into 2. Satine's bodice is also split into 2, except hers has a little star pattern. Instead, I realized that it was going to be really unreasonable for me to try to make a star pattern from the rhinestones I already had, but I was also unable to buy any rhinestones off of Amazon that were in the shape of a star, so I had to make do and just add to my own pattern. And I like the idea of bringing attention there, so I used my SS20s to fill in the area. And then so now I'm filling in the space between the space fillers that I already made. So between every rhinestone on the diagonal, I'm putting an SS10, I believe? Yeah, an SS10. And I'm just making these diagonal lines. And then I go the other direction and I make other lines to kind of cross-hatch and make a little diamond. I think that kind of mimics Satine's pattern, as she had this little, like, almost fish scale pattern. I'm having this little diamond pattern, which kind of looks similar. Again, my head is in the way for a majority of the shot. I apologize. I hope you can see what I'm doing. But really, I'm just cross-hatching here with a much smaller stone. It really fills in the area really nicely. And I went ahead and I did this for all spaces where I had the little space-filling dots. This also takes a lot of adjusting because now it's really clear which lines you made weren't straight and which ones were. And so you kind of have to make sacrifices to try to make sure that your design comes clear. But it's pretty forgiving at the same time, so I wouldn't be too concerned. And you just go ahead and you do that for every space filler that you've made. This was the most time-consuming part of the process because I had to fill in not only the center and the sides, but also the cups, and I had to keep adjusting to make sure all of these lines matched up, and also that they all looked pretty consistent throughout each space that I was filling. And then now to do the hat, I bought this rhinestone trim off of Amazon. I was going to sew it, but it turned out to be more of a jelly shape than it was like a fabric, and so I had to make do. And so I got this top hat also off Amazon, and I decided to wrap the brim around with this rhinestone material. I didn't want to cut off the already existing brim, just in case I wanted to reuse the hat, plus I felt like cutting off the brim could damage it. And then so I cut off the sequin trim just to fit perfectly around the hat, and then I put the two ends at the back of the hat just in case it looked weird, no one could see it from the front. I can't see it, you know, I can't see what's at the back of my head, you know what I mean, so I don't care. I went ahead and I took a piece of clear tape and I put it at the very end of one of the ends, and then I just wrapped it around and tucked the other end in. And there you have a perfectly secured piece of tape to make a perfectly secured brim. And then some of the tape was sticking out, so I just took some scissors and I made it less obvious that some tape was sticking out. From a distance, you can't really see it, as you can tell. And so you turn it around, you don't even know. You have the perfect hat. And so here's how the full costume looks all together, with the gloves, the hat, and the bodice. I really like how it turned out. I really like how it sparkles. And here's my camera with the lights off and the flash on, just so you can see just how sparkly these rhinestones are. They really exceeded my expectations, and then they really make a little disco pattern on the wall, you know, once they catch the light. So I'm really obsessed with that. And so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thanks for watching.